Hi, this is Brooke with Loma Farmstead. Thank you so much for joining me on the soap making tutorial. I hope you learn a lot today and that you feel encouraged and confident to make your own soap. And if you do, I would love for you to share on Instagram or on Facebook your creations and just tag Loma Farmstead in it. That would be so great to see all of you guys making your own soap. So I'm going to go into a little bit about what exactly is soap and the process and the ingredients, the equipment, all of that. But I also just want to give an overview of what this tutorial will be. So I'll start off with a slideshow describing everything that I just stated. And then we're going to get into making a coconut oil soap. And it's going to require some ingredients or equipment, but most of it should be easy to find. So I chose the coconut oil soap because coconut oil is really easy to find. Most grocery stores carry it. A lot of us have it in our cupboards at home for cooking with or baking. And I'm using simple equipment. Some things are going to be a little bit pricier to have if you want them, but they're optional, like a stick blender. I love using a stick blender for soap making, but it's not necessary. You can use a whisk. It just will take longer. So I'm trying to keep this as economical and easy as possible. So I hope that takes a lot of the frustration away and encourages you to make soap. So let's get into the slideshow. Okay, so Loma LLC is my soap making company, and you can learn more about Loma Farmstead and our soaps, as well as see our online store at lomafarmstead.com. So what is soap? Soap is the alkali salt of a fatty acid. It's made with oils, which are made up of fatty acids, and lye. And soap has amphiphilic molecules with hydrophilic and hydrophobic elements, meaning water-loving and water-hating elements that make an emulsion when combined with water. So soap, it has the ability to hold water and oil together, whereas normally they repel each other. And that means that it adheres to, or the dirt, grime, sebum, bacteria, viruses, etc., can adhere to the soap, bond to the amphiphil molecules, and wash away, hence cleaning our bodies and hands. So saponification is the process in which the lye is turning those fats and oils into soap and glycerin. And the process takes about 4 days. So I'm going to get into a little bit about each of the ingredients, meaning the oils, the lye, and the liquid part of the soap. So each oil or fat is made up of a particular fatty acid structure, and each fat and oil also has a particular saponification value, which is also called the sap value. And what that means is that for each gram of oil fat, it requires a specific amount of lye in order to convert those fatty acids into soap. So oils in a recipe are not always interchangeable because of their sap values. If, for instance, you come upon a recipe that has shea butter in it and you're allergic to shea butter and want to swap it out for olive oil, that may not be a good idea. Some oils are pretty much interchangeable and they have similar sap values, but a lot of them vary quite a bit, and so that's why it's important to learn how to use a soap calculator and figure out how to swap the different oils and come up with a recipe that will tell you exactly how much lye you need based on the oils you wish to use. So hard oils are oils that are solid at room temperature, and they generally create harder bars of soap that are faster to unmold. And usually when you have hardness as a characteristic in your soap, it means that, or generally translates to, it's going to last longer, whereas soap made up of softer oils that are liquid at room temperature tend to take a longer time to cure and harden, and therefore they melt away faster when used in the shower or for hand washing, and they don't hold up as long. So that's the difference between hard oils and soft oils. Sometimes soft oils take a much longer time to unmold as well, just because they are so much softer and squishier. You really want to wait for them to firm up so you can handle them before you remove them from the mold. And sometimes that can take 3 to 4 days, and sometimes that can take a week or longer, depending on the oils. And that's why I like to have a mixture of a high percentage of hard oils with some soft oils, and that usually creates an ideal situation where I can unmold it fairly quickly, and they are hard bars of soap that last a long time. Super fat is the remaining oils and fats after the saponification process. So the super fat is what conditions and moisturizes the skin. If you think about oil in the soap and the lye eats up all of the oils and turns it into soap, but there should be some remaining oils left over. That is going to be the super fat. That is going to not leave your skin feeling super dry, but it's what's going to coat the skin remaining on the skin to moisturize and condition it. So there are different types of lye. Sodium hydroxide, NaOH, is what we're going to be using. And that is lye that creates a hard bar of soap. And potassium hydroxide, KOH, creates liquid soap. And sometimes you can do a dual lye soap that has both, such as cream soaps, which are just what you would think of them. They're like creamy, like a lotion. You can like scoop them out of a jar and they foam up. They usually require a preservative, which is why I don't make them, because I don't use preservatives in my product line. But I do make shave soaps, and that is a dual lye soap in which I'm using a 60-40 combination of sodium hydroxide and potassium hydroxide. But it allows the soap to whip up into a really thick lather, like similar to shaving cream, what would come out of an aerosol can, but it's more environmentally friendly, and it's a really big seller for me. So the liquid part of the soap, a lot of people use water because that's easy and available. But if you do use water, distilled or filtered rainwater is best, just to ensure there's no harsh chemicals like chlorine or things that you just don't want in your water. I use our well water because it's worked well for me and I don't notice any adverse reactions. Other liquids that can be substituted for water, milk, you could use goat's milk if you want to make a goat's milk soap. And you could use aloe, you could use fruit juices or vegetable juices. I make soap with carrot juice and cucumber juice. I've made soaps with wine and beer. I've made soap with bourbon. I made absinthe soap, which was really fun. But with any of these, frozen is always better. I like to freeze either the water or milk, juices, whatever. I like to freeze it in ice cube trays and use it that way, because when you combine the liquid part of your lye solution with the lye, it tends to heat up really fast. And by using it frozen, it allows it to cool down much quicker, making it faster to work with. But also, it prevents any unwanted reactions that you don't want. And especially with milk soaps, you don't want to burn that milk. You want to keep it as cool as possible So I not only freeze my milk in ice cube trays, but I also have an ice bath that my container sits in that I'm dissolving my lye in that frozen milk in. So frozen is always better. Always add lye into the liquid part and never the other way around. And then you also want to mix in a well-ventilated area. Make sure you either do it outside or have windows or doors open. And make sure that when you're ready to incorporate your lye into the oils, that it is fully dissolved. If it isn't, you want to strain out those extra lye particles because you don't want any undissolved lye in your soap. So there are different types of soap making. So there's cold process, hot process, and melt and pour, which isn't really soap making, but I'll talk about that in a little bit. So cold process is typically the soap that I make, although I do have some hot process soaps that I do make because of the characteristics that I'm looking for. So cold process tends to be a slower process, and you can be more artistic with it and create different textures and different swirl patterns. And in my opinion, it's more fun to work with. Whereas hot process, you kind of have to work really fast, and like once it's done, you have to hurry up and get it in the mold and squish it in there. So you don't have time to play around with it and work with it, but there are so many advantages to it. So it's, by the time you're putting it in the mold, the soap is done. It's already saponified. You don't have to wait those 4 days before it becomes soap. It already is soap by the time you're putting it into the mold. Because you're using heat, you're forcing it into saponification. You can control the superfat, which is really cool, whereas coconut or cold process soap, which is a soap that we're going to be making today, you can't pick and choose what is the superfat. We can today because coconut oil is the only oil we're going to be using in our recipe, so it is going to be super fatted with coconut oil. But if you're using a combination of oils such as like lard and olive oil and shea butter, in cold process, you don't get to pick and choose which you want as your remaining oils that are going to moisturize your skin. Whereas hot process, you can get that soap making process started and cook that soap, the lye and the oil mixture, and reach saponification, and then add in your super fat. So you could add in hemp oil if you want that as your super fat, or shea butter, or whatever. You can also add in other additives after the saponification to ensure that there's no reactions with the lye. So for example, the hot process soaps that I make are typically my shave soaps and my shampoo bars. And with my shampoo bars, I use kombucha, which has probiotics in it, and it has vitamins and other things in it that I don't think would survive the lye reaction if I made it a cold process way. But because I can add it in after the saponification and the hot process, I can ensure that there's no reaction and that some of those vitamins and things are gonna be okay. I don't expect that like the probiotics are gonna survive the heat, but some of the other wonderful aspects of it should remain. The other thing, so hot process, you can't do as many cool designs with it, which is why I tend to stick with cold process because I love the artfulness of that. But hot process has a more rustic look. And it's difficult to make milk soaps because you are using heat and you don't want to scorch the milk. So milk soaps are generally better made for using a cold process method. And you have to work really quickly, as I mentioned before. Like once the soap is done in the hot process method, you have to work quickly to get it into the mold because it sets up fast. And the positive thing about that is you can cut your soap right away. Like as soon as that cools down, You can cut it, you can use it, it's already soap, but it's going to melt away faster because it's not cured. It hasn't had those 4 to 6 weeks to really evaporate out that moisture content. So it's still, when you make hot process soap or cold process soap, either way, you should still cure it for 4 to 6 weeks. So yeah, you can unmold it right away, cut it right away, use it if you want to. Don't recommend it though, but it has the instant gratification factor, which is kind of nice. Melt and pour. This is great because you're not working with lye. What it is, it's soap base that's already made. So it's already gone through the saponification process, and you're just chopping it up, melting it down, and creating your own unique design with it. So you're adding your own additives, like you can add different colors or different essential oils or fragrance oils, and you can add different texture to it, like ground up oatmeal for some exfoliation. But you're not really creating soap. The soap is already created, so you don't have that control over the recipe. You're only controlling what you're adding, the additives, to customize it with. So the basic process is you measure out all your ingredients, your fats and oils in one bowl, your lye in one container, and your liquid in another container. And then you take your container of lye, and then you pour it into the liquid very slowly and dissolve that. And so then you're just left with your bowl of oils and your lye water solution. And so your oils, you're gonna melt them all together. If you have some hard oils in there that are firm at room temperature, so you heat it up gently so that they're all well incorporated. And then you want to wait until both your lye water solution and your bowl of oils are all within the same temperature, no more than a 10-degree difference. And I typically like to soap at room temperature, which means I'm gonna just let them sit until they're both like within the 10-degree variation, but generally around 70 to 80 degrees. And that way, when they're closer to room temperature, I know that I'm not going to have any weird reactions. I'm not going to have anything volcano, which can happen with really high temperatures. I think it's a safer way to go. And let's see. Okay, so after you have waited and they cool down, they're within 10-degree temperature, then you can combine them. So you want to carefully pour the lye solution into your bowl of oils and blend it with a stick blender or a whisk until it is fully emulsified or a light trace is achieved. And trace is something kind of hard to explain without seeing, but hopefully you'll see that when I get to the soap making part. But it's basically, if you think about pudding in a bowl that you're whisking, and you lift up the whisk and then you drizzle it on top of the remaining pudding that's in the bowl, you can see that like what you drizzled on top is elevated a bit. It doesn't just sink back in and level out. You can see that there's some texture there, and that's what trace is. It's thickened soap batter, basically. And you can do a light trace where it's like a thinner soap batter, or you can do a really heavy trace, which is like frosting consistency. And sometimes you want that. Like, for example, when I pipe soap roses that I want to add to the tops of my soaps, I really need a really thick soap in order to do that, so it doesn't, my soap doesn't just flatten out. It needs to be really firm. But generally, you want it to be on the lighter side, especially if you're mixing different colors and you want it to flow better. So different textures it depends on what you really want to do artistically with your soap. Depends on how thick of the trace you really want to get. So then you pour once it's emulsified and you got the trace that you're looking for, then you can do your designs or just pour it right into the mold. And then you're gonna wait until it's firm. So for me, usually that's anywhere between 8 hours and a few days. It really depends on your soap recipe, and it depends on the mold you're using. So when I'm using wooden molds, I can wait about 10 days, or not 10 days, 10 hours, 8 to 10 hours. And a lot of the times I'll just let it sit overnight and I'll cut it in the mornings. And if I'm using silicone molds, then typically I have to wait about 3 to 4 days to unmold them, just because there's little air or less air contact, and it takes longer to harden. So, and then once it's firmed up, you can cut it or pop them out of the molds if you're using silicone molds, and then set them on some sort of rack or shelf where it's dry and well ventilated to allow them to cure for 4 to 6 weeks. And what that means, curing, is that it's allowing more evaporation to draw out some of that moisture of the bar to make it even harder, and it's gonna last a lot longer when used. So here's the basic equipment. You want safety gear, first and foremost. Safety is important. You want gloves, you want long sleeves, you want to protect your skin and eyes as much as possible. Some people wear an apron if they want to protect their clothing. I typically don't. I don't fuss with that. But gloves and eye protection, long sleeves is important. And I guess what I really want to say about getting lye on your skin, like, this is the part that has been really that has really deterred me from soap making. I had wanted to make soap for a really long time, and it took me about a year to like work up the courage to work with lye. And you know, having soap batter splatter on me or get on my hands or underneath my gloves, where, you know, my gloves and my wrists aren't really covered, or my gloves don't really cover my wrist, and it's not gonna hurt you super bad. It may feel like a little bit itchy or even a little bit like a mild sunburn, but it's not gonna like eat away at your skin and cause like super bad damage. You can keep some vinegar on hand if you want to neutralize that, or what I do is just like wash that area really quick. If I notice like I got some soap batter on me, I'll just go to the sink and wash the area off and then get back to work. It's not a big deal, and I hope this part doesn't scare people from making soap, because as long as you're well protected and know how to deal with it, then it's not scary. So besides the safety gear, you're going to need some plastic or stainless steel bowls to hold your oils and soap batter. You're going to need a scale to weigh out your ingredients. You'll need a spatula to scrape out the soap batter to get it into the mold. And you'll need a spoon for stirring your lye water and or lye liquid solution, your lye and liquid together. You'll need a plastic container for your lye solution. So that's what is going to be, your liquid is going to be held in the plastic container, and then you'll pour your lye into that. And I always use plastic because even though Pyrex is meant for varying temperatures, to withstand varying temperatures, there have been cases where with the ice or the frozen liquid part and the heat that generates from the lye, sometimes that can cause glass to break. And what you really do not want for a situation is to have just lye all over your surface area that you're working with. And it's just, especially if you have kids around or pets, like it's not it's not ideal. So I just don't like the idea of plastic, but I do find that it's safer, and that's what I use. And that's what I recommend. So a stick blender is super helpful. It's not necessary. You could use a whisk, but a stick blender is going to make very quick work. It's going to reach your trace, your emulsification within minutes, whereas a whisk could take an hour, honestly, maybe longer. And some of them are pretty inexpensive, depending on the brand. My first one I got at a yard sale for $5. It's always good to check resale stores or thrift stores, and some are not as great as others, where I like to use a stick blender that can hold up for several minutes, and it won't cause a lot of wear and tear on the motor. So I have a KitchenAid, which I really love. I recommend that one if you're really serious about getting into soap making. It's really great. It can hold up for a long time, and yeah, it's just great. And you can pick so many different colors, which is really fun. And then you're also going to need a thermometer. Again, you don't have to have it. If you don't have, I feel like most people have a thermometer, but if you don't, that's fine. You can just let it sit at room temperature for several hours, and then you can guarantee that they're both about room temperature, and then go from there. But I have one of those laser gun thermometers, and that is really handy. That costs like, I think it was like $13 on Amazon, and we use it for so many things, not just soap making. I use it for cheese making and all kinds of stuff. So that's really helpful to have. And then you need some sort of mold or container to pour your soap batter into. And you can be really creative with this. To be very cost efficient, I recommend using recycled materials. So for our soap making adventure today, I am using a half and half container, paper container, cardboard, and this will create little square bars of soap, which is really nice. Some people use Pringles chips can and just line that with parchment paper, because it has, I think it has like an aluminum foil, and you don't want aluminum in contact with your soap because it can react. But this is just like a waxed cardboard, which is perfectly fine. It doesn't even need a liner. It'll unmold nicely. I've used that several times before. Always works great. And what else? You could use like a glass loaf pan, like for making bread, and line that with either parchment paper or freezer paper, and that will work great too. So many different options. You can be creative. I've even seen people like use a plastic bag as a liner if they don't have parchment paper or freezer paper. You may get like little wrinkles in the soap, but you can always like shave that off like with a vegetable peeler if that bothers you. And some people it doesn't bother at all. So there's a lot of different options. You can be creative, and yeah, so, and you don't have to spend a lot of money on molds, which can be quite pricey, especially the silicone ones. My husband built me some wooden molds, which are really great. I actually have some right here. So these are the sides, and then dun, 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 like this is the base. Sides go like so, and so the sides come off, and then I line it with paper. Really easy. So it can be quite inexpensive. And soap making can also be very expensive. It just depends on how you want to take it. So now that we have all of this covered, I'm going to go into explaining about, so say you have a container you want to use, but like, how do you calculate how much oil and lye and all of that you need for this size container? Well, there are volume calculators that are super duper handy, and I will show you. And then it'll tell you how many ounces of your oil you're going to need, or how many pounds. I tend to work in ounces though. And so it says for this size, which is 2 3/4 by 2 3/4 by, it was like 7.5, but I estimated lower and said about 6.75. And so it shows that we need 19.40 ounces of the oil base. And I am going to round down to an even number of 19 ounces just to ensure that I have enough headspace and allow myself enough room just to be on the safe side. So then we go to soap calculator. So I use soapcalc.net. There are a lot of different soap calculators out there, but I really like this one. At the bottom of the page are these different links, and the one for Soap Calc Lye Calculator is the one you want. So we click on that, and it'll take you through different steps. There's steps 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way down to 7. So you just follow the steps and fill this out. We are selecting NaOH, which is the sodium hydroxide that creates hard bars of soap and not the liquid soap. And we are going to work in ounces. And we are going to do 19 ounces for our milk container. And lye water, I always do a ratio of 2 to 1. 2 parts water to 1 part lye. And then the recommended super fat they have in here as 5%, and generally I stick with that. You can play around with it a little more or a little less, however you want to develop when you're creating your own recipes. But for the recipe that we're working with coconut oil, and that is a very different soap in which it requires, just because of the property makeup of this oil, it requires a higher super fat. If you just stuck with the 5, it would be super drying on your skin and not enjoyable. So we are going to do 25%. You could do 30 if you want to, or 20, but I think 25 is a great super fat. That's what I enjoy. And then number 5, we are going to go down to our oils, fats, and liquids. And this is all of the different oils you can choose from. And you can add them in over here on the right and select the percentage of each of those oils you want to use. But we are only using coconut for this soap. I just want to do a really easy, straightforward soap for teaching this class. So you're going to go with a 76 degree, meaning that it is solid at 76 degree room temperature, not the 92 degree and not the fractioned liquid coconut oil. We're doing the 76. So we're going to highlight that, click add here, and then 100%. Not a billion. 100. There we go. And then we hit calculate, and the second step under number 7 is view or print this recipe. So we're gonna click that, and that'll bring up a new window. And this is what you'd print out for your recipe. This tells you everything you need. So it tells you how much of your fragrance you're gonna use. If you choose to use a fragrance oil or essential oil, it's about 60 ounces, and you don't want to use more than that. You can use less if you want to, but don't use any more. And especially if you're using essential oils, you should know the usage safe rates of those. Not all essential oils are high at that. If you're just using like peppermint, for example, that could be kind of burning on the skin. And cinnamon as well is another one. And so yeah, I could go into about essential oils too, because there's a lot to learn about those, working with them. Some don't always play well with soap. But back to the soap calculator, this is telling us how much water, and I pay attention to just the ounces here. So water is 5.22 ounces, and my scale doesn't get this detailed. It rounds up to the nearest 5. So I would round this down to, say I'm going to use 5.2 ounces of water. I'm going to use 2.60 ounces of lye, and then 19 ounces of oils, and then my fragrance of 0.60 ounces. And So that's your basic recipe right there of all you need. And then down here, this is really interesting when you're developing your own recipe and incorporating different oils. It'll show you the quality of your bars of soap, what it's going to be like. So it tells you like how hard it's going to be, the cleansing, how conditioning, how bubbly, creamy, all of that. And what I pay attention to the most is the cleansing. Like, so you generally want to stay between these ranges, and you'll notice that for this coconut oil soap, it's way outside that range. And that's okay because of just the makeup of coconut oil. It's a really weird oil to work with, and when I use other oils, I tend to stay within 15% of coconut oil, but on its own, I do a really high super fat because it tends to be more of a drying oil and soap. So cleansing, by the way, does not mean how clean it's going to get your hands and body. What it means is how much of your natural oils it's going to strip away from your skin. So you don't want that number super high. When I make facial soaps or soaps for babies, toddlers, I tend to stick to 0. Like I'm not even in that range at all because all soap cleans. It's all going to bubble. It's all going to have those hydrophobic molecules that are going to have dirt and grime stick to it and wash away. All soap would do that, even with a 0 number for cleansing. It's just not going to strip away all of your natural oils and leave you feeling super dry and itchy. So the other thing to pay attention to is hardness. I usually stick within a range of like the high 40s or more because that's what I want out of my soap. I want hard bars that are going to last a long time, going to be easier to unmold, that take a shorter cure time within the 4 to 6 weeks, no more than that. Generally speaking, softer bars are going to take, if they're lower than that and in the lower range, they're going to take a longer time to unmold. They're going to take a longer time to firm up and cure. So that's what I look for. It's not to say that like a softer bar of soap is bad. If you do 100% olive oil, a Castile soap, it's a wonderful soap. It is so nice, but honestly, like a good Castile soap is best when it's cured for a year. And I don't have that patience. So I tend to go for a harder bar soap. And then over here, these are all the fatty acids. So this is the fatty acid structure of coconut oil because that's all we're using. That's the only oil in this recipe. So this is saying that it is 48% lauric acid, 18% myristic acid, 9% palmitic acid, etc. So this tells you the fatty acid makeup. And based on these fatty acids is what this translates to of like the properties of your soap. So now that we've gone through all of that, we can prepare our mold and then get to soap making. So for this mold, I cut the top off of this 50/50 container, and then I cut the sides just because it would be easier to unmold. So I cut all of the sides and then I taped them back up. And I did that because, I mean, I could just like rip the paper away from the soap when I'm ready to take it out of the mold and cut it. But I didn't want to do that. It's easier to reuse when you just cut the sides and then retape it up. It's a little bit more work, but if you're going to reuse it, which you can, I just prefer it this way. So that's how I prepared my mold. There's nothing else you need to do with this. You don't need to have a liner. Just pour it right into that. So next step will be making the soap. Stay tuned. Okay, so I am back and ready to get started on soap making, and I have all of my equipment and ingredients all set out on my table. I put down some cardboard on my table just to protect my surface a little bit, and I have my spoons, my spatulas, my scale, thermometer, mixer, everything ready to go. And so the first thing I'm going to do is measure out my coconut oil. So I make sure I tear out the scale so that I'm not taking into consideration the weight of the bowl. And okay, get my spoon, get my gloves on. Okay, so I need to weigh out my 19 ounces of coconut oil. 5, 19, right on the dot. Okay, done with that. And I can set this aside now that I have that measured out. And now I'm going to measure out my lye water solution. You could also use coconut oil, coconut milk as part of your liquid for the soap if you wanted to. I've done that before. It makes a really nice creamy soap. So we are going to measure out our lye. Make sure to tear your scale so you don't take into consideration the weight of the container. I did too much. Still a little bit too much. It's important to be precise. Okay, so that is good to go. And now I'm taking my plastic container for my water that I'm using, but like I said, you could use frozen coconut milk. That's what you prefer. Here at the scale. A bit too much. So, and sometimes, okay, because with these ice cubes, you don't get a precise amount because it's just the size that the cubes are. So I'll add in a little bit of liquid water just to get to the precise amount that I need. There we go. So we have our lye ready, our water ready, and our coconut oil. So I am going to go pop this in the microwave really quick and melt this down. Okay, so while that is warming up in the microwave, I am going to get started on my lye water solution. So now it's time. I'm really going to need these fancy schmancy goggles and make sure I am protected because you don't want that lye water splashing on us. So have your long sleeves, your gloves, your goggles, eye protection, you're good to go. So take my spoon and my lye and just start off slow, just add a little bit at a time. Keep mixing it, stirring it around so you don't get chunks of lye. You want it nicely dissolved. Add a little bit more. And I forgot to mention this earlier in the first part, but lye is easy to find at most hardware stores, and a lot of the time it's used for drain cleaner, so it's labeled as drain cleaner, but you want to be careful with that. You only want to get, if you are looking in like the drain cleaner aisle of a hardware store, you want to make sure it's 100% lye and no other weird chemicals in there. Obviously, we don't want funny things in our soap. But as long as it says 100% lye, that's commonly what it's used for. Lye is used in a lot of other things. It's actually used in food for making bagels and other things. But when we're looking for it to purchase, usually you find it in hardware stores labeled as drain cleaner. Sounds weird to make soap made out of drain cleaner, but that it's just 100% lye. That's all it is. Slowly melting. Ooh, sometimes it pops. Ice does it when it gets warmed up. So we have protection. We care about our skin and our eyeballs. And usually I'm not this close to it. I'm standing up, but just the camera angle, popped again, is yeah, usually my face is further away from this, so I don't recommend being this close to it. And especially not being like near open doors and windows. I do have a slider door open. So there is ventilation, which is important. Make sure you have proper ventilation and you're not breathing in these fumes. I often do this process outside, especially when in the winter, when there's like a big snow pile and you want your lye water to cool down quickly, you can just plop it right down in the snow. Okay, add the rest of this in. There's a little bit remaining in the container. Scoop that out. Okay. Continue to stir. All the ice is just about melted. Still a little bit of undissolved lye in the bottom. You can see. And sometimes it takes a while and you just have to keep stirring. But it's really important that all of that is dissolved because you don't want any undissolved lye chunks in your soap where there's spots where it may be lye heavy because it wasn't well dispersed. Okay, this is looking pretty good, and I'm gonna go check on my coconut oil. Okay, it needs just a little bit more time. In the meanwhile, I'm going to check the temperature of this lye water with my little laser gun. So right now it's reading at 91 degrees Fahrenheit. A little bit warmer than room temperature, but that's okay. It's in the low 90s. You can sometimes work with that. Okay, and our coconut oil is almost all melted. A little bit that is not quite melted, so I'm just going to keep stirring, and that should. Okay, that looks all pretty. It's all melted. There's no more solid pieces in there, so I'm going to take the temperature of this, and it is 96 degrees, and this is still holding out at 91. So these are between the 10 degrees difference between the two of them. So we're within 10 degrees, I should say. So I can go ahead and make soap right now with this process. It's a little bit warmer than I tend to soap at. Usually I go for like in between the 70s and 80s, but this is fine. Like as long as it's not over like 100 degrees, that's when I'm more concerned about having reactions that I don't want, and therefore I let it chill out a little bit longer. It's okay to soap at those higher temperatures, and a lot of people do. I just don't like to. So I can be patient. So we can get started. We have our lye water solution and our oils. And actually what I'm gonna do right now, I'm gonna add some essential oils. I want this to be a lavender and lemongrass scented soap. And if we go for 0.60 ounces of essential oils, I'm going to do 0.3 ounces each, do half and half, of lavandin, which is a hybrid of lavender. Some people actually prefer the scent of lavender or lavandin over lavender. It's actually a little bit more economical too. And then my organic lemongrass oil. Now, lavender and lemongrass. So it ends up being about 10 millimeters each, or 60 milliliters total, to get 0.60 ounces of essential oils. And make sure you look up your essential oil safety usage rates before you choose what essential oils you want. Okay, stir that all in. Now I can get my stick blender on, ready to go. And what I typically do is stick this in at an angle and then tap it out to get any air bubbles out of it. You may have seen some air bubbles come up. And that just helps to get rid of any unwanted air bubbles in your soap. And then carefully put your lye water solution in. I tend to pour it down the shaft of my immersion blender just to disperse it better, like so. Take that off so it's not top heavy. And oh, and more lye water left out in my container. There we go. Put this back on. And bring it to an emulsion. See it change color right away. Going from clear liquid to a little bit more opaque. Sometimes I just take a break from the mixer and stir a little bit as I go. Sometimes using an immersion blender, it can accelerate the soap quite quickly, and so it's good to start off slow, like use the blender a little bit and then hand stir a little bit. And a good way to check if your soap batter is emulsified is to look at the stick blender. If you can see like the oil and water separation on the metal of the stick blender, then you know it's not emulsified and you got to keep going. So sometimes if you want a very light trace, if you want a really fluid soap for doing certain patterns, then you just want it to get it to the emulsification point. You don't want to get like a thick trace. But I'm going to go a little bit thicker. And so you can tell it's thickening up a little bit. A little bit heavier. But I don't see that trace yet. When I drizzle this on top, I can't see the impression of where it was or see any I can't see any trace of where I drizzled it. And this is looking much thicker. And I can see a very subtle light trace. I don't even know if the camera could even pick that up. And also another trick is if you don't want to keep blending but you want a thicker trace, sometimes you can just leave this and let this sit. As long as it's fully emulsified, it'll start thickening up on its own without blending it. But just to get it there faster, you can stick blend it until you get it to the thickness that you want. Otherwise, you can just let it sit. If you let it sit too long, then it's going to be too firm to work with. So you have to keep an eye on it, pay attention. Okay, so this, as you can see, is a much thicker pattern. It's a trace. Like you can see where I drizzled it on, it's still a little elevated and it hasn't like totally sunk back in and flattened out. Such a weird way to describe traces. It's a weird thing to describe and yeah, at all. It's just something you have to like see, I think, for yourself. So I am just scraping all of this off as much as I can. I try to clean up my equipment as much as possible just because I don't want all these unsaponified oils going down my drain when I do my cleanup. Okay, so undo this. I'll go in this container because I'm done with it. And now we can get our mold and pour this in. I'm gonna stand up for this. So this, now you can see, like this is a thick trace. It stands up where it's poured, right? It doesn't just completely level out. Like I can mound it up. That is, I would say that's like a medium trace. Okay. So now I can just pour this in. It smells so good. If you guys ever have any questions about soap making after this class, you're welcome to reach out and message me anytime. If you need resources or tips and tricks, want to know how to find out more about essential oil safety, safe usage rates, if you want to know about the other links that I shared, or just have questions about developing your own recipe and want my opinion as to whether or not you think it would make a good soap, I am so happy to help out. So feel free to reach out anytime, or Facebook, Instagram, or email. Okay, so I just about got that all scraped out. little bit tiny bit left in there. A little bit left on the spoon. So, and then we can tap this out just to level it off. Make sure there are no air bubbles in it. Don't tap too hard or it'll come up at you. Had that happen before. Not fun. And so we are just gonna let this sit. I'm actually gonna pop this in the fridge because it is a coconut oil soap, and like I said, coconut oil behaves weird in soap, and that's why we had to have a super high super fat. And it also gets really hot. So I'm gonna pop it in the fridge to make sure the soap doesn't crack or volcano. And then I'm gonna cut it in about 2 hours. That's the other thing about coconut oil soaps, is that you can cut them really fast. You don't have to wait overnight. You don't have to wait 4 days or 8 to 10 hours. You need to cut them fairly soon. In fact, if you wait too long, then it's gonna be impossible to cut. It'll be too brittle and it'll just break apart and you won't be able to get nice clean cut bars. So I'm gonna pop this in the fridge and then I will be back when it's time to cut it in a couple hours. Stay tuned. Okay, I am back and it's time to cut the soap. Super exciting. So I don't feel like I need eye protection anymore because I'm not working with liquid, lye water. There's no chance of stuff splashing up at me, but I am still gonna wear gloves because this is not soap yet. It's still going through the saponification process, which is gonna take up to 4 days. But so handling it with bare hands, you can still get lye burns, and we want to avoid that. So it's important to wear gloves. I'm just taking the tape off of my handy dandy little mold that I made. This is still quite warm, even though I just took it out of the fridge and it's been in there for, let's say, like about an hour. Like, wasn't even a full 2 hours. It's still quite warm, but sticking my gloves. But it's firm. Like, this is hard as a rock. So, and I can, since I pre-cut this, I can just peel this away like so. Smells so good. I'm gonna take this right out of the mold and look at this soap we have. How exciting. And so I'm gonna take my soap cutter and cut this into bigger chunks. I want bigger bars for this soap, but you can cut it as thin or as thick as you like. I'll show you my soap cutter. There it is. So I tighten up. It's just like a tar string kind of thing that slices down through. So we get there we go. Okay. So now I can just scoop this up and trim off that top bit. Top part cut off. And I can slide this all the way to the end. Slide right down through. And as you can see, it's still a little bit gelled in the middle, but that will continue to harden up. Like that. Cut this. And this isn't much different than those cheese slicers that you see in kitchen equipment stores, or I'm sure you can probably find them in Target or Walmart, stores like that as well. This just has like a stop to it, so I slide my soap up to where I want, like however thickness I want, and then just cut it. So I have these in 2-inch pieces, but if you cut them in 1 inch, obviously you get 6 bars of soap with this volume and this mold. And then these are just going to sit out and continue to cure, and they're going to be that beautiful white color, which is so nice. A lot of natural soap makers have a hard time creating a really white bar of soap, and they often use titanium dioxide to whiten their bars of soap, which isn't really a natural product. But coconut oil soap makes a beautiful, like white bar soap. Lard does as well. But if people are vegan and don't prefer to use animal products, coconut oil is a great option. So thank you so much for joining me on this soap making adventure. And I really hope that you try to make your own and have the confidence to do so. And if you have any questions at all, please reach out. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching.